Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. Israel is carrying out more strikes on Iran and intensifying its attacks on Hezbollah in Lebanon. The U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, is closed after minor damage due to what appears to be a drone strike. Qatar says its Air Force shot down 2 bomber aircraft coming in from Iran. And the United States has now pulled out non-emergency embassy personnel from 6 countries. Following the death of Iran's supreme leader on Saturday, U.S. President Donald Trump says attacks on Iran will intensify and continue for at least the next 4 to 5 weeks, possibly, in a widening regional conflict that is creating instability throughout the Middle East. At least 787 people have been killed in Iran, according to the Iranian Red Crescent Society, and at least 52 people have been killed in Lebanon. Iran has retaliated by striking at least 10 Middle Eastern countries, also claiming lives and damaging infrastructure. 2 Amazon data centers were struck by some debris in the United Arab Emirates. Financial institutions say that their services were impacted by reported outages in the cloud. 11 people were killed in Israel, according to local officials, and 6 U.S. soldiers have now died. The CBC's senior international correspondent, Margaret Evans, is in Amman, Jordan. Margaret, good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
This is escalating rapidly. It's day 4 of this conflict. What is the latest from your perspective?
Well, really, the most significant development this morning, and things are changing very rapidly, but it is this escalation, this spread of the conflict to rope in Hezbollah, the Shia proxy that exists in Lebanon. And if you'll remember, they've had a ceasefire with Israel over the past year, but Hezbollah had fired shots at Israel in retaliation for the death of Iran's supreme leader. We've seen Israel firing back, and now this morning saying that it has prepared, it is ordering ground troops to move in to take positions inside Lebanon in order to prevent, they say, Hezbollah from firing back at Israel. This, of course, is going to send a lot of fear and anxiety to people living on both sides of that border. But for Lebanon, of course, occupied in the past by Israel, people are going to be very worried about that possibility in the fact that, that ground troops, boots on the ground, are being ordered by Israel. Right now, we don't have any information confirming any sort of large incursion at this point, but certainly they've been positioned along the border there in any case. And it certainly is, it's an escalation, a spreading of this conflict, the epicenter of which exists in Iran and the Israeli-American attacks there.
What about where you are in Jordan? I mentioned that Middle Eastern countries, at least 10 of them, have been struck by Iran. And what are you seeing where you are?
Well, we hear air raid sirens here as well. The sound of Royal Jordanian Air Force jets, fighter jets, is a constant overhead. And there have been, the same instances of air defenses shooting down Iranian missiles and then debris landing. No casualties at this point, but Jordan does host U.S. troops, but people are really angry about it. They're saying, why us? Why now? Why are you firing on your neighbors? We're not attacking you. And so the anger is there, and it's hurting them economically, which of course is what some people say the strategy is on the part of the Iranians and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard there, is to inflict pain on some of its neighbors so they might pressure the Americans to actually end the war.
You're seeing that as well through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a major global shipping corridor, and that is essentially closed. Iran has warned nations not to send any ships through the Strait of Hormuz.
That's right. I mean, it's a strategy, economic strategy, an economic pain strategy. Of course, unfortunately, it's a strategy that also costs human lives. But those are the kinds of tactics that it's taking right now. And it, the regime, the Iranian regime, has issued all sorts of please don't take this personally. We're only attacking you because you host those military bases. But of course, we've seen the impact, especially in the Gulf countries, of some of these attacks hitting civilian and commercial infrastructure.
Donald Trump said on the weekend that these attacks, that this military effort was an opportunity for Iranians to take back their government, to get out on the streets and take control of their country. There were these enormous protests in Iran at the beginning of this year, followed by a very severe crackdown by Iranian officials. And you spoke with people during those protests, but you were also in Iran last May. What is your sense from the people that you have been speaking with about, and obviously it's not a monolith, but what is your sense as to what people want in this moment?
You know, when I think back to being there last May and the welcome that we received, Canadian journalists in particular don't get into Iran very often. People, the younger generation there feels very, very isolated, hoping for change, hoping for a way out of that country because of the economic situation and the worsening of that situation, which the Iranian regime and many people will blame on Western imposed sanctions on the country, is what led to the deteriorating situation, which led to those mass protests. You know, people want different things. Not everybody wants the overthrow of the Islamic Republic, but many, many, many people do and have been fighting for it for years and paying the price. This is a country, a regime that, you know, jails, tortures, and in some cases executes its political opponents. So that struggle for freedom has been there forever. And now all of a sudden you have this military operation and a U.S. president that comes in and out, sometimes saying, yes, I'm behind you and your cause, and sometimes retreating back to, well, what we want is this nuclear deal. So there's confusion for people, and there are internal divisions. And there are, of course, inside Iran, many supporters, too, of the regime. It's the regime they've grown up in. It is a religious way of life, and they've lost their spiritual leader in this way. But in terms of the people who do want change, you get a lot of people exhausted and say, well, nothing else has worked. Yes, let's see what happens. But you also have people saying, listen, I'm the one who has to, you know, stop my son from going out in the street and potentially being killed by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard or the myriad security forces. And now we're being bombed. And sort of this sort of idea of pick up the chains we've loosened, which is sort of the terminology coming from Israel and the United States. People are saying, how do we do that when we don't have the kind of weaponry that obviously the Iranian regime has? So it's not a clear picture. It's quite divided. And I think that's been one of the criticisms over the years of people are criticizing those who want change, is that the opposition in Iran is not united.
This is, as you have said and as I have said, escalating very, very quickly and changing minute by minute in some ways. What is something that you will be watching for in the hours and days ahead?
Certainly, I'm going to be watching Lebanon because there are a lot of test cases there. It's going to expose, in a sense, how strong are the pro-Iran proxies in the region now. You know, they've taken a lot of hits during post-October 7th and the Israeli war in Gaza against Hamas. Certainly, Hamas has been weakened. Is Hezbollah really able to actually create major concern across the region by the entrance by these cross-border attacks that are taking place? Certainly, it's going to put real pressure on the Lebanese government, which has, you know, staked its reputation on being able to control Hezbollah. So a lot of people are going to be looking at what is Israel's purpose going to be? Is it to basically finish what it started in terms of disarming Hezbollah, or is it some kind of, you know, push into that territory? There are also reports that Israeli troops are moving into, you know, the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, further across the border into the Syrian part of the Golan Heights. So it's watching the reaction of the Gulf countries. But again, every day, almost every hour, there's something new to take into consideration. So it's actually a lot to keep an eye on.
Margaret, we will talk again, I'm sure, as this unfolds. In the meantime, take care of yourself, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Margaret Evans is the CBC senior international correspondent. She's in Amman, Jordan. Thus far, there have been mixed messages from Washington about its endgame in Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump has both said that the U.S. wanted to limit Iran's nuclear capability and disable its missile capacity, while also encouraging Iranians to take hold of this opportunity for potential regime change. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio echoed some of that to reporters yesterday.
Our mission and our focus is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and their ability to manufacture them, as well as the threat posed by their Navy to global shipping. That's our objective. That said, we would not mind, we would not be heartbroken, and we hope that the Iranian people can overthrow this government and establish a new future for that country. We would love for that to be possible. But the objective of this mission is the destruction of their ballistic missile capabilities and of their naval capabilities.
Kaveh Shahrooz is a lawyer, human rights activist, and senior fellow with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, also a former senior policy advisor on human rights to Global Affairs Canada. Kaveh, good morning to you.
Very good to be with you, Matt.
What do you think Donald Trump's end game in Iran is?
Well, frankly, I don't think Donald Trump himself knows what the end game is. A couple of days ago, there was a very funny tweet, funny in a very tragic way, that somebody had put out, indicating that Donald Trump had called a number of different reporters in the span of one evening. And in each case, he had basically said his aim was different. So I think he was just road testing different ideas. But I think to the extent that the United States has a coherent position, it's to get rid of Iran's nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, to prevent Iran from being able to create the kind of terror that it did on October 7th and, prevent it from continuing to threaten Israel and other countries in the region. I think Marco Rubio's point, the segment that you just played, was right. I mean, if it so happens that Iranians overthrow this regime, all the better. But I don't think that's necessarily, a key objective. I think if some faction of Iran's regime was to make an offer to the United States that Trump could live with, I suspect they would take it.
Is your sense, and I want to come back to that offer, but is your sense, Donald Trump has talked about this, and he talked about it on the weekend, saying this is the opportunity for the people of Iran to take to the streets. This is your chance to seize your country. Do the people of Iran have the means to do that?
The people of Iran, unfortunately, by themselves do not have the means to do that. They really tried over several years, over several decades, frankly, but we saw the most stark illustration of that in early January when they rose up in record numbers. And they did not mince words. They wanted this regime gone. And they were met with an iron fist. They were met with bullets and military-grade weapons and thousands upon thousands of dead. So I think, regrettably, they by themselves can't do it. They're unarmed and they're facing a really vicious enemy. Now, whether this bombing campaign by the United States and the weakening of the regime will be sufficient to then give people an advantage so that they can take over this government and they can take government institutions and begin to run them, that remains to be seen. I think it's a little bit early to say.
On social media on the weekend, you said, "While it is difficult to watch one's homeland be bombed, I know this attack is what many Iranians prayed for." How are you understanding and processing all of this? Is a complicated story, and there are a lot of different things happening at the same time and happening within people at the same time. How are you processing that?
Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult feeling to put into words. I know that that's what a lot of Iranians are praying for because I have heard it from members of my own family that live in Iran, from friends. I see it expressed a lot on social media. And you really have to think about how horrible the situation has to be for people to pray that an outside government, two foreign governments, come and bomb their country. The feeling is one that, it's incredible sadness that it's come to this. It's, rage at the regime that has done this to its people and that's brought this country to to war. But there's also a glimmer of hope in there. This idea that perhaps finally there will be a chance at change, because for too long Iranians have said they want to change, but they haven't been able to achieve it, and the international community has ignored them. And it's, in my view, it's sad that it's taken a Donald Trump to get us here. But these are these are the cards we've been dealt, I suppose.
And yet, you would know this personally from things that you have faced, that there is a substantial constituency of people who still support the regime, whether they're in Iran or whether they're here in Canada.
Well, I don't know if I would describe them as a substantial constituency.
Well, certainly a vocal and forceful constituency.
Certainly. They are a constituency, and they are forceful in the sense that they are the ones that have the guns. But I mean, ultimately, even if Iranians manage to achieve democracy, they have to live with the fact that there is going to be a percentage of the population, I don't know exactly what that number is, 15%, 20%, that have supported this regime, that want the theocracy and dictatorship that this regime has offered. Figuring out how to deal with them is going to be a challenge, and I don't think they're going to make it easy. I think they will resist any democratic move, and they will ultimately have to be brought into the fold, and it has to be shown to them that a democratic system is not going to destroy them. It's going to allow them to practice their religion privately. It cannot be in public life, and that aside from perhaps some top-level regime officials, the rest of them might have a future in a democratic Iran.
Is there an alternative that could take over right now? The former Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, there's been a public relations offensive in some ways, putting him in the frame. And I don't know whether he is the one who people want, but is there an alternative right now?
Well, Reza Pahlavi certainly is the man of the moment. He seems to have a lot of vocal support outside the country, inside the country, to the extent we can tell from the videos that were emerging. People were chanting his name, but it's fairly difficult to assess exactly what his level of support is. I have personally been critical of him, and I know some of your listeners that are of Iranian background will get angry at me for this, but I have been very critical of him because I think the movement he has built is not one that's very inclusive. It's one that's based on excluding, ethnic minorities. It's based on excluding people with left-wing views, for example. One of the favorite chants of his supporters is calling for the death of the left. So I worry that he by himself will not be able to convince all the different constituencies to come together and build a free Iran. I do think I think he is going to be part of the answer, but he won't be the one necessarily delivering democracy. I think if he is going to achieve anything, it will have to be in coalition with leaders of ethnic groups, feminist leaders, women that are in Iran, currently in prison, that have been struggling for years, and they have different politics and they have different constituencies. Together, I think they can form a real democratic alternative to this regime.
Just briefly, we're almost out of time. Let me ask you quickly. The Prime Minister, Mark Carney, put out a very strong statement in support of the attacks. The former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lord Axworthy, criticized that, in part talking about whether this war is within the rule of law. What did you make of the Prime Minister's comments on this?
I actually support Prime Minister Carney's message. I think Iran's regime has indicated that diplomacy with it will go nowhere. So it really left the international community with no options. I know that it's difficult to say that war is permitted, but in this case, I really don't see another option to protect the international community.
And you see, just very briefly, you use this phrase, a glimmer of hope, and you said that on social media as well, that you feel a jumble of emotions. You see a glimmer of hope from this moment?
I think for the first time in 47 years when this regime has been in power, this is the first time that I think a free Iran is possible. So yes, I do see a glimmer of hope here.
Kaveh Shahrooz, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Kaveh Shahrooz is a lawyer, human rights activist, and senior fellow with the Macdonald Laurier Institute, giving his perspective on this story from Toronto.